The social cognitive theory of personality. So social cognitive theories. So where the clinical views lack scientific backing, the social cognitive theories are, uh, you know, that's their foundation is scientific tradition. They emphasize research. So some of these other theories aren't necessarily that scientifically backed up, but this one definitely is. So the most well-known of these theories is observational learning, supported by Albert Bandura. Bandura said that we are not only driven by our inner forces and the environment, but also expectations about how those actions will affect other people, the environment, and ourselves. So if you remember Albert Bandura, he's famous for doing the Bobo doll experiment, right? Um, where he had the two groups of kids watch adults play with the Bobo dolls. The group that watched adults be very aggressive with the Bobo dolls, when it was their turn to play with the Bobo dolls, they were very aggressive, hitting and kicking the Bobo dolls, which shows that we learn by seeing. Right? If you look, obviously, with the internet, you can see a ton of videos out there. I just saw one the other day where they were teaching dogs. They had like this little pet, like a stuffed animal, and it would eat the food and then it would like roll over like it was dead. And then you would see the dogs and numerous different dogs doing this, and then they would spit the food right out, right? Learning that, hey, this is maybe bad for you. So in observational learning, we learn new responses by watching each other's behavior. Personality thus is learned behavior patterns. These cognitive processes involve an ongoing relationship between the individual and the environment called reciprocal determinism. All right, so make sure you guys know that. Oh, kind of cross that out, but and you're going to see it on other slides as well. And you see an example of it down here, where everything kind of influences everything else, right? Behavior influences your environmental factors, which influence your personal factors, right? That's your cognitive, affective, and biological events, which then affect your behaviors. Your behaviors affect your personal events, which then affect your environment. They all, play a part with each other. So here's another example, right? So we talked about reciprocal determinism is the interacting influences between personality and environmental factors. So we have internal personal cognitive factors, like let's say you like high risk activities like bungee jumping, skydiving. Therefore, that leads you to do those type of behaviors, so you learn to bungee jump. Well, that can influence your environmental factors. You tend to be friends with other people who like to do those things, right? And so, you see how it works. Or you can look at like, you tend to do what your friends like to do. So if you're friends with people who like to bungee jump, therefore you learn to bungee jump. And therefore that, you know, becomes some personal factors, cognitive factors. You learn to like it. And then you do other high risk activities. So that's what reciprocal determinism is how these three things kind of influence each other. Internal and external locus of control. We talked about this with personality, or sorry, we talked about this with motivation before. So, Julian Rotter developed this in 1966, I believe. Um, and it was all about, like where do you feel like personal control comes from? So, you take this test and you either have like an internal or external locus of control, or there's like an intermediate in between. So internal locus of control, which is personal control, is our sense of controlling our environment rather than feeling helpless. External locus of control, the perception that chance or outside forces beyond one's personal control determines one's fate. Right? So an internal locus of control, whatever happens to you, you feel like, you take responsibility for it. An external locus of control, you feel like it was outside forces. It was just meant to happen, right? That's fate, right? So this is like things are kind of predetermined. So if you think about it, people with internal locus of control, they usually, might be more successful because they take more responsibility for what happens to them. So they might be more willing to work harder. And for a lot of people, it depends on the topic on whether, so when we do like the test, a lot of people fall in between because it depends on what topic you're talking about. Some things they feel like they have control over, and some things they don't. But if you have an external locus of control, that leads people to having something called learned helplessness. So learned helplessness is the hopelessness and passive resignation an animal or human learns when unable to avoid repeated adverse events. So something bad happens to you and you just kind of give up. So I see students sometimes like this, they do bad on one thing and then they just don't try anymore on other activities or other tests. Uh, there's a video I'll post on the playlist that shows this is how they train elephants. So they will, when they're young, they tie them up and they can't get out of it. And so when they become adults, they tie them up the same way, which they could easily get out when they're an adult elephant, but they don't because of learned helplessness. They've learned as when they were younger that they are trapped, so they don't even try getting out anymore. Right, so that's an example of learned helplessness. So here's just like a little flow chart. So something bad happens to you, right? An uncontrollable bad event. Let's say you get in a car accident, maybe on the highway. So that leads to a perceived lack of control. You feel like you have no control when you're driving. Therefore, you have a generalized helpless behavior. Therefore, you just don't drive at all. Or maybe if it's on the highway, you refuse to drive on the highway, right? That is learned helplessness. And I got a couple videos, the one I already described to you, and then there's another video on the playlist that I highly recommend you guys watch. Positive psychology. This is really um, there's a big push for positive psychology out there right now, which I agree with. I think there needs to be more of it. So positive psychology is the scientific study of optimal human functioning. So it aims to discover and promote conditions that enable individuals and communities to thrive. So it's looking at what's the best way to live our lives, essentially, right? How can we be most effective, be our best person? And even if you want, I mean, I know there's some like positive psychology Facebook groups and stuff like that. There's some good articles out there, especially even like if you're struggling maybe with being positive, it might be good to look at some of those things and maybe try them out. All right, the last slide. So social cognitive perspective we talked about was built from research on learning and cognition, so make sure you know that. But what are some criticisms of it? It fails to consider unconscious motives and individual dispositions. All right, so we talked about Freud. He relied too much on it, but social cognitive perspective is all science, and there's a lot of unexplained there, right? So, we have to, leave it open that there might be some unconscious motives, and social cognitive perspective doesn't do that. So today, cognitive behavioral theory is perhaps the predominant psychological approach to explaining human behavior. All right, so we look at the cognitive, the social aspect of it, along with the behavioral theory, and that's pretty much how we explain a lot of things, as you're going to see in the next unit when we talk about different psychological treatments.